Dear students, after going through the introduction of the poem, now let us discuss the poem in detail. Someday I will go to Ars to see his peat brown head, the mild pods of his eyelids, his pointed skin cap. So here Seamus Heaney is expressing his desire that someday he will go to Ars, the museum where the body of this Tollund man has been kept, and he expresses his desire that he would see his peat brown head. His head was brown because it was covered in the brown peat. The mild pods of his eyelids, his pointed skin cap. As you can see here in this picture, the body of the Tollund man as he was found from the peat by those two brothers. This picture of the Tollund man became the source of inspiration for Seamus Heaney, and he was so inspired that he made this Tollund man as a subject matter of his poem. So the mild pods of his eyelids are being compared to the pods which are the pea pods in fact. And here, as I told you earlier, that the imagery is related to again his own childhood experiences, because he grew up in a farm and he was very close to nature, and he saw his father growing up vegetables and crops in the farm that they owned. So that's from where this imagery is coming. His pointed skin cap, and as you can see here in the picture, that the cap which this Tollund man was wearing, it was pointed and it was made of the skin of an animal. In the flat country nearby where they dug him out, his last gruel of winter seeds caked in his stomach. So here Seamus Heaney is telling you that how the body of this Tollund man was found. They are the two brothers who, while they were digging peat for fuel, they found him there, and they considered him as some person who had been recently murdered. But later on, when different investigations were carried out and different chemical tests through which this body passed, it was found out that this Tollund man had been there since centuries. And the last gruel of winter seeds caked in his stomach, the last food that he had probably was made up of the seeds taken from different vegetables, and it had transformed into a cake. It had become solid in his stomach. Again, here the imagery that Seamus Heaney is using is related to countryside. The body was found in the flat country. That is, it was found in Tollund, which was a small village of Denmark. And then the last food that this Tollund man had was of vegetable seeds. And here again, by referring to seeds, Seamus Heaney is again depicting his knowledge of farming and his knowledge of the countryside where he grew up. So in this stanza, again Seamus Heaney continues with the description of the Tollund man. When his body was discovered by the two brothers, he was naked. And he goes on to say, naked except for the cap, noose and girdle. I'll stand a long time, bridegroom to the goddess. So there was nothing on his body except there was a cap, a pointed cap which was made of hide, and a noose was tied around his neck, and there was a girdle around his waste. So he says that I will stand there for a very long time. It shows that he is so much interested, and this has inspired him to such an extent that he will stand there brooding over the cause of this death. That what was the reason? Why was this Tollund man killed and then buried, and why had he been lying there for so long? Then he goes on to give him the title of a bridegroom. He is a bridegroom to the goddess. So it was because when this body was found out, and a lot of investigations were carried out on the body, and it was passed through different kind of chemical examinations, it was established that this body belonged to the pre-Christian era, the time when there was paganism practice around in that part of the world, and people, they used to offer human bodies as a religious ritual to appease the gods and goddesses. So he now, when he says that he's a bridegroom to the goddess, so he assumes this is Tollund Man, who had been lying there buried in this bog for centuries, was probably offered as a ritualistic sacrifice to appease the goddess. She tightened her talk on him and opened her fan, those dark juices working him to a saint's kept body. Trove of the turf cutter's honeycombed workings, now his stained face reposes at ours. So in the previous stanza, when he says that this Tollund man, he served as a bridegroom to the goddess, he is alluding to the mythology where this goddess to whom he refers is the goddess of fertility, who was called as Nerthus. And this Tollund man, when he was offered as a sacrifice, it was with the purpose to appease the goddess so that she would in turn make the land fertile. So in this stanza, in the fourth stanza, the process of this ritual is being depicted here. When the goddess, she tightened her talk on him and opened her fin, those dark juices working him to a saint's kept body. So this Tollund man, when he was offered and when he was buried in the earth, he served as a bridegroom to the goddess earth. And through the union of both, that is the Tollund man and the earth, he was then preserved. And when he was discovered from the earth centuries later, he had been transformed into a saint, and he became the trove of the turf cutters. That is, he was a treasure which was found by those brothers who were cutting the turf through those peats which had been converted into or which looked like honeycombs due to continuous digging. And later on, because he was when it was established that he was a man from pre-Christian time, and he was, when the archaeologists were also consulted, and he became something very precious. So Seamus Heaney says that now his stained face reposes at ours. He is now preserved in a museum where he is kept and where people come and see him, and he has gained a status of a saint. The same poor Tollund man who was sacrificed in order to satisfy or in order to appease the goddess Nerthus, centuries later has been transformed into a saint and has become something very honorable. Now, in the second section of the poem, Seamus Heaney is linking the Tollund Man with the Irishman. The sacrifice of the Tollund Man centuries earlier is being linked with the sacrifices of the Irish people for their land. So he says, I could risk blasphemy, consecrate the cauldron bog or holy ground, and pray him to make germinate the scattered, ambushed flesh of labourers, stockinged corpses laid out in the farmyards, telltale skin and teeth flecking the sleepers of 4 young brothers trailed for miles along the lines. He is comparing Ireland to a cauldron. The Ireland which has the characteristics of being bog. A bog is marshy land. So he is comparing his country to a cauldron bog. And he says, I could risk blasphemy. Because being a Christian, he is now here giving the status of a saint to the Tollund Man. And he says that by giving a pre-Christian era man a status of a saint, he is probably going to put at risk his own religion, that is Christianity. But he says that I can take the risk of being blasphemous by converting my land into a cauldron bog and consecrating it and asking him, that is the Tollund Man, to make our land holy and to make it germinate in the similar way as his sacrifice later on germinated the land and made the land fertile. So he says that I can risk blasphemy and ask the Tollund Man. He is giving him the status of some god, that he can offer prayers to him and ask him to make his land in a similar way holy, and the sacrifices which are being offered by the Irishmen, the sacrifices should also make bring peace to his land. Then in the second and the third stanza, he is giving very graphic pictures of the bodies of mutilated bodies of the young men who were mercilessly killed during the troubles of Ireland. And he is linking the sacrifice of the Tollund Man, whose sacrifice brought fertility to his land. So he says that while visiting to ours, where this Tollund Man has been kept as a saint now, as a treasure now. So he says, I can risk blasphemy and I can also ask the saint to pray for my cauldron bog, that is Ireland, and make the sacrifices of my Irish people do not go waste, and bring fertility to my country. And then he goes on to give the details of the scattered, ambushed flesh of laborers, the laborers who were killed, and then stocking corpses which were laid out in the farmyards, the bodies of the farmers who were found in stockings, and then the telltale skin and teeth flecking the sleepers of 4 young brothers trailed for miles along the lines. The dead bodies of 4 brothers were found along the railway track, and how their bodies were brutally mutilated. He says that in a similar way, the sacrifices being offered by Irishmen, by his people, they will not go waste. So I will make a prayer to this Tollund Man by granting him the status of a saint, that he should also pray for my land so that the sacrifices of my people should not go waste and my country should regain back its